The gift my mother-in-law handed me at my baby shower made an entire room of smiling guests fall silent. My husband laughed and told me I was being too sensitive. Looking back now, that was the moment I should have understood exactly where I stood in my own marriage. My name is Emily Carter, and 7 months into what should have been one of the happiest seasons of my life, I learned that sometimes the people who smile the brightest at your celebration are secretly waiting to make it about themselves. The baby shower was held on a warm Saturday afternoon in early May. The community room at Willow Creek Country Club had been decorated with soft pastel balloons, white roses, and little wooden signs that said, "Welcome, baby." Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, making everything glow with the kind of warmth you see in greeting cards. For weeks, everyone had told me how lucky I was that my mother-in-law, Linda, had insisted on organizing the entire event. "She must be so excited to become a grandmother," my friend said. I smiled every time I heard it. I wanted to believe that was true. I arrived wearing a light blue maternity dress Rachel had helped me pick out. It was simple, comfortable, and made me feel beautiful despite the swollen ankles and constant exhaustion that came with the third trimester. As soon as I walked into the room, guests applauded. Friends, cousins, co-workers, and neighbors surrounded me with hugs and congratulations. For a little while, I felt genuinely happy. Jason stood beside me, one arm around my shoulders, greeting people as they arrived. Everything seemed normal, maybe even perfect. Linda floated around the room greeting guests like she was hosting a charity gala. Her silver blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her smile never left her face. Every decoration had her touch. Every conversation somehow circled back to her. At first, I ignored it. That was simply Linda being Linda. She always needed to be the center of attention. As the afternoon continued, we played games, opened refreshments, and chatted with family. Then Linda clinked a spoon against her glass. The room gradually quieted. "Before Emily opens the gifts," she announced, "I have one very special surprise." Guests smiled and turned toward her. Jason smiled too. I remember looking at him and feeling relieved. Maybe this was finally a peace offering. Maybe Linda wanted us to start fresh before the baby arrived. She walked toward me carrying a large gift box wrapped in expensive silver paper. The ribbon was tied perfectly. Cameras came out. Phones were raised. Everyone expected a touching grandmother moment. Linda handed me the box and squeezed my shoulder. "Go ahead, sweetheart," she said. "Open it." I carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my stomach dropped. Inside the box was a photo album. Every page contained pictures of Jason. Baby Jason, toddler Jason, teenage Jason, college Jason, hundreds of photographs. There wasn't a single picture of me anywhere in the album. On the final page, framed in decorative lettering, was a message that read, "The most important baby in our family will always be my son." For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room became so quiet that I could hear the air conditioner humming above us. My cheeks burned. I looked around and saw confused expressions everywhere. A few people looked embarrassed. Rachel stared at Linda in disbelief. Then Linda laughed lightly, as though she had delivered the funniest joke in the world. "Isn't it adorable?" she asked. And before I could say a single word, Jason chuckled beside her. Jason chuckled beside her. "Come on, Mom," he said with a grin. "You are going to make everyone think you love me more than the baby." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, but they faded almost immediately. Most people were not laughing. They were looking at me. I forced a smile because I did not know what else to do. My fingers still rested on the edge of the album. The message on the final page seemed to grow larger every time I looked at it. "The most important baby in our family will always be my son." Linda placed a hand over her heart as if she had just delivered something sweet and sentimental. "Oh, Emily knows I am joking," she said. "Right, sweetheart?" I heard the question, but for a moment I could not answer. My throat felt tight. 7 months pregnant, surrounded by family and friends, standing in a room that was supposed to celebrate the child growing inside me. And somehow I felt invisible. "Of course," I finally managed to say. "It is very thoughtful." The words tasted strange the second they left my mouth. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her chair across the room. I knew that look. She was angry, probably angrier than I was. The problem was that Rachel had only seen this moment. I had spent years watching Linda turn every milestone into something that revolved around her. The engagement party became a celebration of how hard it was for her to let her son grow up. Our wedding rehearsal dinner somehow turned into a speech about her sacrifices as a mother. When Jason and I bought our first home, she spent the entire housewarming party explaining how much better Jason's childhood home had been. There was always something. Always a way to redirect attention. Always a way to remind everyone where she believed she belonged in the hierarchy of our lives. I closed the album and carefully set it aside. The room slowly returned to normal conversation. More gifts were opened. More photographs were taken. People smiled. People chatted. On the surface, everything looked fine. Yet something had shifted inside me. I found myself noticing details I had ignored before. Every time someone congratulated me, Linda found a way to insert herself into the conversation. Every time someone asked about the baby, she answered before I could. When my cousin Megan asked whether we had chosen a nursery theme, Linda immediately replied, "We are still deciding." We. Not they. Not Emily and Jason. We. The word followed me through the afternoon like a shadow. By the time the party ended, my feet ached and exhaustion settled deep into my bones. Guests hugged me goodbye and loaded gift bags into their cars. Rachel lingered near the entrance. She gave me a look that said she wanted to talk, but did not want to do it in front of anyone else. Before she could approach me, Linda wrapped an arm around Jason and smiled proudly for one last photograph. I watched them standing. Together, mother and son, both smiling at the camera. Then I noticed something that made my stomach sink even further. Jason looked happier in that moment than he had looked beside me all afternoon. The drive home was quiet. Jason focused on the road while I stared out the passenger window at the passing neighborhoods bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. Gift bags filled the back seat. Tissue paper peeked out from colorful packages. Anyone looking at us would have assumed we were a happy couple returning from a successful celebration. The silence told a different story. After 20 minutes, Jason finally spoke. "You have been quiet." I kept my eyes on the window. "I am tired." "Well, it was a long day." He paused. "Mom really worked hard on everything." There it was. Not a question about how I felt. Not a comment about the awkward moment with the photo album. Just concern for Linda. I nodded slowly. She definitely put a lot of effort into it. Jason seemed satisfied with that answer. The rest of the drive passed without much conversation. When we got home, I changed into comfortable clothes and carefully lowered myself onto the living room couch. My lower back ached. The baby shifted gently, reminding me that I was not alone in any of this. Jason carried gifts inside and stacked them near the fireplace. For a few minutes, we worked together in silence. Then my phone vibrated. A text message from Rachel appeared on the screen. "Are you okay?" I stared at the message for several seconds before replying. "I am fine." The response came almost immediately. "No, you are not. We need to talk." I hesitated. Rachel was not the type of person who created drama. If she wanted to talk, there was a reason. Before I could answer, another message arrived. "There are things you do not know." My stomach tightened. I glanced toward the kitchen where Jason was unloading leftover desserts from a cardboard box. He looked completely relaxed, completely unaffected, as though the day had gone exactly as planned. I put my phone down and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling building inside me. That night, sleep refused to come. Around midnight, I lay awake listening to the hum of the ceiling fan. Jason slept peacefully beside me. I studied the shadows on the ceiling and replayed the afternoon in my mind. Linda's smile, the album, the message, the laughter, the strange looks from guests. One memory led to another. I remembered the day we announced the pregnancy. Linda had cried before I did. She had immediately started talking about what she wanted to be called as a grandmother. I remembered our first ultrasound. She had insisted on attending. When the technician handed me a printed image of the baby, Linda had asked for a copy before Jason even did. At the time, I told myself she was simply excited. Now, lying awake in the darkness, those memories felt different. Like pieces of a puzzle I had been arranging incorrectly for years. My phone lit up again on the nightstand. A new message from Rachel. This time it contained only 6 words. "Emily, she planned that whole thing." I barely slept after reading Rachel's message. "Emily, she planned that whole thing." Those words stayed with me until sunrise. By 7 o'clock the next morning, Jason had already left for work. The house felt unusually quiet. I stood in the kitchen holding a mug of tea that had long since gone cold, staring out the window at our backyard. The swing Jason had assembled for future afternoons with our child sat untouched on the patio. It should have made me smile. Instead, I felt unsettled. Around 9 o'clock, Rachel called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew this was not about assumptions or misunderstandings. She sounded serious. Careful. I did not want to upset you yesterday, she said. Not at your baby shower. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Tell me what you meant. There was a brief pause. 3 days before the party, I stopped by Linda's house. My stomach tightened. Rachel continued. She explained that she had been dropping off a gift basket she had put together for me. When Linda answered the door, several decorations and party supplies were spread across her dining room table. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Rachel noticed the photo album. I asked her what it was, Rachel said quietly. She laughed and told me it was going to remind everyone who the real center of the family was. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. She said that, word for word. I closed my eyes. Rachel continued carefully. Linda had apparently spent nearly 20 minutes showing the album to 2 of her friends. According to Rachel, they looked uncomfortable. One woman even suggested that the gift might hurt my feelings. Linda's response had been simple. Emily needs to learn her place before that baby arrives. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I stared at the hardwood floor beneath my feet. Learn my place. I repeated the words silently. They sounded less like a joke and more like a mission statement. Rachel hesitated before continuing. There is something else. My heart sank. What? She told people that becoming a grandmother was the most important event happening this year. Not your pregnancy. Not your experience as a first-time mother. Her becoming a grandmother. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. The painful part was not hearing what Linda had said. The painful part was realizing how familiar it sounded. Every major moment of my adult life seemed to follow the same pattern. Somehow, eventually, the spotlight shifted toward Linda. The engagement, the wedding, the house, the pregnancy, and now the baby shower. One memory surfaced after another. I remembered announcing the baby's name shortlist during a family dinner. Linda immediately produced her own list of alternatives. I remembered decorating the nursery. She criticized nearly every choice. I remembered my prenatal appointments. She constantly asked Jason for updates before asking me. At the time, each incident felt small, separate, easy to excuse. Sitting there with the phone pressed against my ear, I finally saw the pattern. Rachel was right. None of this had started at the baby shower. The baby shower had simply been the first time Linda stopped hiding it. After my conversation with Rachel ended, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. The clock above the refrigerator ticked steadily. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. For years, I had convinced myself that every uncomfortable interaction had a reasonable explanation. Linda was protective. Linda was excited. Linda meant well. Those explanations had become habits. Comfortable lies I told myself because the alternative was harder to face. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Megan, my cousin. We had not spoken much since the party. Her text was short. Are you feeling okay today? I thanked her and said I was resting. A few minutes later, another message appeared. There was something uncomfortable about yesterday. I hope you know that. I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Honestly, several people noticed it. Several people. The words settled heavily in my chest. That afternoon, I walked through the nursery we had spent months preparing. Pale green walls. A white crib near the window. Shelves lined with children's books. A soft blanket folded carefully in the rocking chair. Everything looked peaceful. Everything looked hopeful. Yet standing there, I found myself thinking less about Linda and more about Jason. That realization surprised me. Linda's behavior was hurtful. It always had been. But Linda was not my partner. Linda had never promised to build a life with me. Jason had. Every memory that surfaced now seemed connected to a larger truth. Whenever conflict appeared, Jason stepped aside. Whenever Linda crossed a line, Jason smoothed things over. Whenever I felt uncomfortable, I became responsible for keeping the peace. The pattern was impossible to ignore once I finally saw it. Later that evening, Jason came home carrying takeout from my favorite restaurant. He smiled as he set the bags on the counter. Thought you deserved a break from cooking. Normally that gesture would have made me happy. Instead, I found myself studying him carefully, looking for something I had missed, looking for the husband I thought I knew. During dinner, he talked about work, a new project, A difficult client. Traffic on the interstate. I listened quietly. Eventually, he noticed my silence. You seem distracted. I set down my fork. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you know about the album before the party? His expression changed immediately. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. A brief flicker of discomfort. Mom mentioned she was putting together something special. My stomach tightened. And you never asked what it was? He looked down at his plate. I did not think it was a big deal. The answer hung between us. Simple. Calm. Devastating. Because for the first time, I realized the problem was not that Jason failed to notice what was happening. The problem was that he noticed and decided it did not matter. That conversation changed something inside me. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It was more like a crack spreading slowly across glass. Once it appeared, I could not stop seeing it. Jason finished dinner and carried his plate to the sink. He moved around the kitchen exactly as he always did. Calm. Comfortable. Unaware of the shift happening right in front of him. I remained at the table for several minutes after he left the room. His words echoed in my mind. I did not think it was a big deal. The more I thought about them, the worse they felt. Because he was right about one thing. He had known. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not the exact message hidden inside that album. But he knew enough to ask questions. Enough to recognize that his mother was planning something unusual. And he chose not to look any closer. The following week passed quietly on the surface. I attended my prenatal appointment. I folded baby clothes. I organized gifts from the shower. Life continued. Yet I found myself paying attention in a way I never had before. I started noticing how often Linda called Jason. Every morning. Every evening. Sometimes in between. If he missed a call, she left messages. If he did not respond quickly enough, she texted. One afternoon, I was sitting in the nursery assembling thank you cards when Jason walked in holding his phone. Mom wants to stop by this weekend. I looked up. Why? He shrugged. She wants to see the nursery. I stared at him. She has already seen it 3 times. She is excited. There it was again. The explanation that seemed to excuse everything. Excited. Concerned. Protective. Loving. Different words. Same result. Later that night, after Jason fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The house was dark except for a small lamp near the couch. I opened my laptop and began sorting through old photographs. Wedding pictures. Holiday gatherings. Birthday parties. At first, I was simply reminiscing. Then I started noticing patterns. In photo after photo, Linda occupied the center of every frame, standing between us, holding Jason's arm, positioning herself beside major milestones. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. Yet once I saw it, I could not unsee it. Then I found a photograph from our engagement party. I remembered that evening clearly. Jason and I had been announcing our wedding date when Linda interrupted to tell a long story about Jason's childhood. Everyone laughed. The attention shifted. At the time, it seemed harmless. Looking at the picture now, I remembered something else. I remembered feeling disappointed. Not because of the story itself, because it had happened over and over again. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel appeared. Any updates? I hesitated before replying. Then I typed the truth. I think I have been blaming the wrong person. A few seconds later she responded. What do you mean? I looked toward the hallway where Jason slept peacefully upstairs. My eyes lingered there for a long moment. Then I typed 4 words that surprised even me. Linda is not married to me. Rachel did not reply immediately. When her response finally appeared, it contained only one sentence. Then stop treating his choices like his mother's fault. I stared at the screen for a long time. The words were uncomfortable because they were true. For years, I had separated Jason from the consequences of his own decisions. Every time he stayed silent, I blamed Linda. Every time he avoided conflict, I blamed Linda. Every time he allowed my feelings to become secondary, I blamed Linda. It was easier that way. Easier to believe our marriage was being disrupted by an outside force than to admit the problem lived inside it. The following Saturday morning, Jason mentioned that Linda planned to visit after lunch. Normally, I would have adjusted my schedule without question. This time something felt different. Actually, I said, folding a stack of baby blankets, today is not a good day. Jason looked surprised. What do you mean? I mean I am tired. I want a quiet afternoon. He blinked as though the possibility had never occurred to him. Well, she is already expecting to come. I nodded calmly. Then you can call and tell her the plan changed. Silence filled the room. Not angry silence. Confused silence. Jason stood there holding his coffee mug, clearly waiting for me to give in. For years, I probably would have. This time I did not. A few minutes later, he walked into the kitchen and made the call. I could not hear Linda's words, but I could hear her tone, even through the phone speaker. Sharp, disappointed, unhappy. Jason spent several minutes explaining and apologizing. Apologizing, as though protecting a pregnant wife's need for rest required an apology. When he ended the call, he looked frustrated. She is upset. I continued folding blankets. She will survive. He stared at me. I could almost see him trying to understand what had changed. The truth was simple. I had stopped asking for permission to prioritize myself. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in the nursery. Sunlight poured through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because anything had been solved. Not because Jason suddenly understood. But because I finally understood. Boundaries were not punishments. They were protections. Every healthy family had them. Every healthy marriage needed them. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Rachel. How are you feeling? I looked around the quiet room before answering. Better. Stronger. A minute later she replied. Good. Because there is something else you need to know. My stomach tightened. Rachel rarely used dramatic language. If she believed I needed to know something, it mattered. I opened her next message slowly. As I read the words on the screen, the calm I had finally found began slipping away again. According to someone who attended the shower, Linda had been telling relatives a story about the baby's future. A story that did not include me at all. My eyes moved across Rachel's message slowly. According to one of Linda's friends, she had spent part of the baby shower describing exactly how things would work after the baby arrived. She talked about babysitting schedules, holiday traditions, weekend visits, first birthdays, family photographs. Every plan revolved around her and Jason. My name barely appeared. At first, I felt angry. Then something unexpected happened. The anger faded and was replaced by clarity. For weeks, I had been collecting pieces of a puzzle. Now the picture was finally complete. This was never about one album. Never about one embarrassing moment at a party. It was about control. Linda had built an entire vision of the future where she remained the central figure in her son's life. The arrival of a grandchild was supposed to strengthen that position, not change it. The following Thursday, Jason and I attended a family dinner at his Aunt Carol's house. Nearly 20 relatives filled the dining room. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread drifted through the house. Conversations bounced from one corner of the room to another. On the surface, everything felt normal. Yet I noticed something different almost immediately. People were watching me, not in a cruel way, more in a cautious way, as if they knew something I did not. During dinner, Linda sat at the center of the table telling stories about becoming a grandmother. Several times she referred to the baby as our little one. The first few times I ignored it. Then she began discussing future plans. I already told Jason I will help make the important decisions, she said with a laugh. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Aunt Carol lowered her fork. Rachel, who had also been invited, stared directly at her plate. Linda continued speaking. Young parents need guidance these days. The room grew quieter. Then something happened that I did not expect. Aunt Carol spoke up. I think Emily and Jason are perfectly capable of making their own decisions. The table went silent. Linda laughed lightly. Of course they are. I am only joking. Nobody laughed with her. A few seconds later, another relative cleared his throat. That is not exactly what you were saying at the shower. My heart skipped. Linda's smile froze. The atmosphere shifted instantly. For the first time, people were not looking at me. They were looking at her. One by one, small comments followed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cruel. Just observations. Someone mentioned the album. Someone mentioned the speech. Someone mentioned comments that had made guests uncomfortable. The details were different, but the pattern was the same. As the conversation unfolded, I noticed Jason becoming unusually quiet. He listened. He watched. He heard stories from people who had no reason to exaggerate. People he trusted. People who were describing the same behavior from different angles. For the first time since all of this began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not defensiveness. Not excuses. Uncertainty. And in that moment, I realized something important. The truth no longer depended on me convincing him. The truth was finally speaking for itself. The ride home from Aunt Carol's house felt different from every other ride home we had taken after family gatherings. There were no excuses, no quick explanations, no attempts to smooth things over. Jason kept both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. The silence between us was heavy, but it was no longer empty. Something had changed. When we arrived home, he helped me out of the car and carried my bag inside. Neither of us spoke much that evening. Around 10 o'clock, after the dishes were done and the house had settled into quiet, Jason sat across from me in the living room. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked down at his hands. "I think I owe you an apology." I felt my chest tighten, not because I was surprised, because I had waited so long to hear those words. "I should have listened sooner," he said quietly. "I kept telling myself Mom meant well. I kept making excuses." He paused. "And every time I did that, I made you carry the consequences." I did not answer immediately. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The nursery door remained slightly open down the hallway. The future we had been preparing for suddenly felt closer than ever. "I never wanted you to choose between me and your mother," I finally said. "I wanted you to recognize when something was wrong." Jason nodded slowly. "I know that now." The following weeks were not perfect. Real change rarely happens overnight. There were difficult conversations, new boundaries, uncomfortable moments. Linda was not happy when Jason explained that certain decisions would belong only to us. She argued. She complained. She insisted everyone was misunderstanding her intentions. But for the first time, Jason did not ask me to absorb the discomfort. He handled it himself. A month later, our daughter arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. When the nurse placed her in my arms, the room seemed to disappear. The anxiety, the arguments, the months of tension, none of it mattered in that moment. She was healthy. She was beautiful. She was ours. Jason stood beside me with tears in his eyes. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like we were standing on the same side. A few days later, family members visited one at a time. When Linda arrived, she approached carefully. She looked older somehow, less certain. She stared at her granddaughter for a long moment before looking at me. "She is beautiful," she said softly. I nodded. "She is." There was no dramatic confrontation. No perfect speech. No grand victory. Life rarely works that way. What changed was something quieter. Respect replaced assumptions. Boundaries replaced expectations. And slowly, a healthier version of our family began to take shape. Sometimes I still think about that baby shower. I still remember the album, the laughter, the silence that followed. At the time, it felt like one of the worst days of my pregnancy. Looking back now, I see it differently. That day forced me to stop pretending everything was fine. It forced Jason to see what he had spent years avoiding. Most importantly, it taught me something I hope my daughter never forgets. Love does not require you to disappear so someone else can feel important. Real love leaves room for everyone at the table, including yourself.